Clevinger. Winds it up, delivers. Thome drills one high and deep to center. Away, way back. Gone deep into the picnic plaza, and that might have even got out of the ballpark. Jim Thome has just left Jacobs Field onto Eagle Avenue. That will take 2 tape measures.
Welcome back, everyone. I am your host, Brandon Castel, and this is episode 4 of Just a Bit Outside, our Cleveland Indians podcast here at Buckeye Scoop. I thought I would start out this week's episode with a little bit of background on myself, but of course, we've got a lot more to talk about after the Cleveland Indians made their road trip to Chicago, which ended in dramatic fashion. 2 of their players, 2 key players, put themselves in a compromising position, and not for some chicken wings. So we've got a lot to cover on this episode. Want to get into Zach Plesac and Mike Clevinger, everything that happened there. We certainly have to touch on La Mole and the man who's been putting balls into the seats far beyond the normal human level here over the last week in Franmil Reyes. And we'll take a little bit of a look around the league. So what's been going on now that we're about a third of the way into the season? We're getting into that 20-game mark. Again, we're only playing 60 games this season. So very, very strange that we're, into 21, 22 games, and we're already thinking about where teams are positioned for the playoffs, where teams are positioned for the wild card. And so we're going to touch on a lot of those things this week on our episode. Wanted to give you all just a quick kind of background on myself before we jump into the Zach Plesac, Mike Clevinger fiasco, which I know is really the topic of the hour here in Cleveland, and one of the topics of the hour around the sporting world. Of course, this fits into a lot of what our team has been talking about this week on Buckeye Scoop here, related to Ohio State, related to the Big Ten, how they're dealing with COVID-19 and their response or lack thereof. And we'll hear a lot more about that coming out with some of the parents speaking up, with Justin Fields leading the charge to see if they can actually get on the field and play this fall. So we'll talk a little bit about the impact on Major League Baseball, the Cleveland Indians in particular, really at the center of some of the controversy right now around, these players and what they're being asked to do, what they're capable of doing, and, how that can impact those around them and the ability for these teams and these leagues to continue to function in this COVID-19 environment. So excited to get into that a little bit on this week's episode. As I mentioned, I am your host, Brandon Castel. You can find me on Twitter at bcastohio. You can also follow this podcast on Twitter at JustOutsidePod. So excited to get to connect with a few of you on the Indians here. My background, have been in this world of sports journalism now for quite a while. Started out covering Ohio State back in the day. I've worked for a number of different outlets across the board, from Rivals to 24/7, to when I met Mr. Tony Gerdeman at the Ozone and had a fantastic experience working with Gerd. And really that led to, again, a lot of great people being involved in Buckeye Scoop. But that kind of led to my interest in wanting to join this kind of dream team that's been assembled here and be able to bring you some coverage around Cleveland sports. And so this is a little bit of a new venture for me in talking about the Indians. Of course, as I mentioned on my first episode, grew up around the Indians, grew up watching the Indians. Some of my best and worst sports memories are from those 90s Indians teams. But I spent the majority of my actual journalism career covering the Ohio State Buckeyes, really started out covering Ohio State baseball back in the day, and moved into football, and then most recently covering the Cleveland Browns. And so we'll be talking a little bit more about the Browns here in the future, but excited to be able to connect with you all on the Cleveland Indians. This has already been a really exciting season for this baseball team, and I wasn't really sure exactly what to expect when we started the year. There were a lot of potential opportunities for where this team could go and really what direction the Indians franchise might be headed when you think about moving on from guys like Corey Kluber in the offseason, moving on from Trevor Bauer in the offseason, really wondering how losing those two guys was going to impact this baseball team. And the most interesting thing I think that we've seen in 2020 that really benefits the Cleveland Indians for the long term is the fact that you really haven't missed a beat with those two guys being gone. This pitching staff, this starting rotation is one of the best rotations in all of baseball. On some days, you could probably argue they are the best rotation in baseball, certainly with the way that Shane Bieber has pitched. And honestly, it feels a little bit wrong for me to not be spending this entire episode talking about Shane Bieber. I think you could talk about him on every episode, but we've done a lot of that already. And so I'm sure he'll be a topic that we'll get into a lot more as we get a few weeks further into the season. He's continuing to make his case to be the American League Cy Young Award winner. But we're going to talk a little bit about the rest of the rotation today, which has done a fantastic job of really replacing two guys who are, when they're at their best, elite. I mean, you look at what Trevor Bauer has done this season with the Cincinnati Reds. I don't think anyone has ever doubted that Trevor Bauer has the stuff to be a number one starter in the major leagues. He's got some of the best stuff in baseball, but can he keep it together for the long haul? Can he keep his physical gifts together with his mental thoughts? And he's a guy who shares a lot of those thoughts on Twitter. If you haven't followed Trevor Bauer, he's an interesting follow for sure. Obviously, most people in Cleveland are familiar with the drone incident that potentially led to their loss to the Chicago Cubs in the World Series back in 2016. I'm not going to blame it entirely on that, but we can get into that on another episode about Terry Francona being forced to start three guys essentially at the end of that series, all on 3 days rest. Not exactly what you want in the World Series. And so I wasn't sure exactly what we would see this season when you thought about replacing Kluber. Obviously, he didn't pitch much for the Indians last season, but he had been a mainstay really for the last decade in Cleveland, and then Trevor Bauer as well. And so they've done a fantastic job really with this rotation of replacing those guys and developing some of these young starters who look like they're going to be, the next wave of great Cleveland Indians pitchers over the next, hopefully decade, but at least half decade, you would think. And so a lot of that has been good for the Indians and good for the long-term potential of this Cleveland team. But obviously, two of those players put themselves in compromising positions in their road trip to Chicago. And so the Indians are having to play without two of those guys that have been a mainstay or have been a key part of the Indians' rotation to start the season. First, it was announced that over the weekend when they were in Chicago that Zach Plesac had been sent home from that trip for violating the coronavirus health and safety protocols. He was sent back to Cleveland from Chicago via car service, so he wasn't even allowed on the team plane with his teammates to fly home from Chicago. That's how seriously they were taking this. And then we'll get into this a little bit more, but then Mike Clevinger, it turns out, was also with Plesac when they were out and about in Chicago, or at least they were out later than their 10 p.m. curfew allowed them to be. And so both of those guys are not with the team right now, and we're going to get into that. That's a big topic, obviously, here in Cleveland. It's a big topic around Major League Baseball. What's going on with these two players, the choices that they made, the impact that it's having on their team, and then the potential impact that something like this can have on the game of baseball. I mean, we're in a very fragile time, as folks know, with everything going on in college sports and college football in particular. We're in a very tumultuous period where, one little ripple effect could change the future, could change, the ability for these teams to actually be on the field playing. And so, we all knew that coming into the season. There was already a concern around, what might happen with this team and would they be able to actually go out and play. And so, that's, I think, the big concern for these guys right now is can you continue to get guys on the field without having more of these incidents? And so we're going to get into that a little bit today. I'm going to first start out by reading the statement that Zach Plesac released initially, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some of the details and get my thoughts on that and where I think that these players can go from here, where the Indians are going to go from here. But here's the statement from Plesac. He said, "I would like to apologize to my teammates, the entire Cleveland organization, and all of our fans for our actions Saturday evening. I realized I made a poor decision to leave the hotel, which broke protocols and could have endangered other people. I understand that in these times of uncertainty, I need to be more vigilant and responsible, and I am determined to earn my teammates' forgiveness and get back to work. And so that apology, I think, covered a lot of the bases. Certainly there's going to be some work to be done between Plesac and Clevinger and the rest of the Indians. But again, if that had been the rest of the story at the time, I think we might be on to a new topic. Not entirely. I think this is going to be the underlying topic for the entire season. But I think we would be on to a new topic and really be discussing some of the more important things that are happening on the field with the Indians. But of course, that's not where the story ended, and that's really just where the story began. Certainly, we know that it wasn't just Zach Plesac who, when he released that statement, we had thought he was all alone in this, which is why the Indians sent him back to Cleveland via car service on his own. This came after he made his start on Saturday, August 9th against the Chicago White Sox. He threw 6 scoreless innings, and he's been fantastic this season. And so obviously this is a kid, 25-year-old, who grew up in the Chicago area, grew up in Crown Point, Indiana, which is just south of Gary, Indiana, about an hour outside of Chicago. So this was basically a homecoming trip for Plesac, and he decided he wanted to go hang out with some of his friends that he probably hasn't seen much. When you think about travel bans and you think about folks being isolated and really not having a lot of interaction with folks outside of your core family group, and in this case, your teammates, a lot of times we forget, that these players have lives outside of the game of baseball. And so Zach Plesac decided that he wanted to go hang out with some folks, and he left the team hotel in Chicago, went out to dinner, went to socialize with some friends. And, again, that was kind of the big news at the time. And then the bigger news came out a few days later, which is a problem in and of itself, that it wasn't, announced, or they didn't decide to make it public at the time, which was that Mike Clevinger had also left the team hotel in Chicago with Plesac. And so, in my opinion, this is the bigger news, because Plesac was sent home in the car service, but Mike Clevinger got on the team plane. And so, to me, that is the more egregious offense, and we'll dive into all of that today. But Mike Clevinger got on the team plane, put the team's immediate season in jeopardy by getting on the team plane, potentially, put some of his teammates in jeopardy, depending on how things had played out. And we'll talk a little bit about what Plesac says actually occurred when they left the team hotel. But, potentially based on what we knew at the time, certainly could have put some of his teammates at risk. And I think, just as importantly as the fact that, they're trying to keep these guys from doing these kinds of things because the season is in jeopardy, right? I mean, maybe not the entire season, but a portion of the season is in jeopardy if some of these guys do test positive for COVID-19. You're potentially talking about missing a few days, a few weeks of the season, and potentially impacting other teams, the Chicago White Sox, impacting some of the other teams that you've played recently. And so obviously this is something that could have been that drop in the pond that ended up having a ripple effect across the board, impacting many, many people and impacting a number of teams. Adam Plutko had the harshest criticism for these two pitchers. And again, those are two of the guys who are on this pitching rotation, on this staff with Plutko. Now, he's not a part of the starting rotation this season, although he was last year, and I guess now he is because of this incident. But Plutko came out with, I think, the most harsh criticism of both Plesac and Clevinger, which was when he said the following. He said, "They hurt us bad. They lied to us. They sat here in front of you guys and publicly said things that they did not follow through on." Plutko is one of the Indians' representatives to the MLB Players Association, so he knows a lot about the COVID regulations and the protocols that are in place with Major League Baseball. And he's talked a little bit about the fact that, these are grown-ass men, and that was his term, but he's not going to speak for them. And he said, so those grown-ass men can sit here and tell you guys what happened and tell you what they're going to do to fix it. I don't need to do that for them. So that was probably the most damning of all of the criticism. Francisco Lindor was actually the first, I think, really to come out and be critical of his teammates for not thinking of other people, for not thinking of the greater good of the team and the greater good of society. And I think that when you hear quotes like that from some of their teammates, that's probably a good indicator of why the front office, why Chris Antonetti and Mike Chernoff decided they were going to option both of these guys to their alternate site, which is essentially, demoting them to the minor leagues. Now, we'll see how long that lasts, but, that was a decision they made after kind of gathering all the facts, hearing from the rest of the team. And you got to wonder if guys like Frankie Lindor, some of the other leaders of this team, maybe Shane Bieber, were consulted on this. What should we do for the good of the team? I mean, that is a brotherhood in the locker room, whether it's college football, whether it's the NFL, whether it's Major League Baseball. That's a brotherhood in that locker room. And I think Terry Francona has the ability to manage that brotherhood in the locker room as well as almost any coach, manager that I've been around. He really understands that. Obviously, he grew up around it, his dad, and he grew up around the game and was a player. And so he really is the ultimate kind of player's manager. But I think he also knows how sensitive that can be, how you really have to have guys who are out there every day fighting for each other, who are out there every day sticking together when things get tough and when guys are struggling and, you have some ups and downs and, maybe you have some of your key guys not playing as well as you need them to play. And so you're relying on some other guys. You got to keep everyone together. And I think Francona understands that. I think Francona's done as good of a job with that as anyone that I have seen. And so not surprising to me that they decided to send these guys down. Antonetti said, they felt like it gave their team the best chance to win and to be the best team that they could be, to send those guys down. But it's not an easy decision when you think about the on-the-field performance or the on-the-field impact. And that's really been felt over the last week with these guys not being a part of the rotation, especially Plesac, who was having a fantastic start to the year. He began the year as the team's fifth starter, but he really had been lights out to start the season. He had a 1.29 ERA, a .67 WHIP, and 24 strikeouts in 21 innings over the first three starts of the season. And so he was a guy who was really right there with Shane Bieber as one of your most important pitchers. And so now you're without him. And then Clevinger, of course, he's a guy who they were expecting to really be your number 2 or number 3 starter coming into the year, really began the year as the number 2 starter and has had a decent start to the season, 3.24 ERA, 15 strikeouts in 16 2/3 innings over 3 appearances. Now he struggled in his third game of the season, but this is a guy that was coming off injury. And so they expected both of these guys to be a key part of this rotation, and they will expect them to be a key part of this rotation going forward. So you're missing a few of your key guys now with those two out because of this whole incident. You have Adam Plutko now, who's been thrust back into the starting rotation where he was last season, and he has struggled in returning to the rotation. And it was a guy that they felt like gave them great depth, as a spot starter and a guy who could potentially pitch some long innings out of the bullpen. But with Plutko kind of rejoining the rotation, he has struggled in his first 2 outings. He lasted just 4 innings in his first start against the Cubs. So that was, again, part of that Chicago trip the Tuesday following that weekend when all of this went down. And then on Sunday, the Tigers even ran him out of the game after 2 2/3 innings. He gave up 3 runs in his start on Sunday, and so they had to turn things over to the bullpen early yet again. Thankfully, the lineup showed up. Thankfully, the long ball was working in Detroit on Sunday, and, with a little bit of a tense moment in the ninth, they got through that, and they got the win despite that rough start from Adam Plutko. But obviously, this is a guy that they're not expecting to rely on the rest of the season. And so the Indians are going to need Zach Plesac. They're going to need Mike Clevinger back in this rotation as soon as possible. However, Plesac didn't do himself any favors when he decided to post a 6-minute video on Instagram. And I have some mixed feelings about the video. I know it's been received with a lot of criticism, including his manager, Terry Francona, who is not overly thrilled about his decision to post that video. I don't think Tito would ever suggest that any of these guys go direct to the media with something like that or direct to the public, with something like that. But, again, I think he said a lot, and there were some good things in there. There were some kind of cringy things that Plesac said in this video, but I'm going to dissect that a little bit today and want to talk a little bit about just the ramifications and reverberations of this decision the video, and what it means for Plesac, Clevinger, and the Indians. So going to, again, read a little bit of what Plesac said on the video. You can look it up probably online somewhere. I think it's still out there. But he said, truthfully, I'm disgusted with the way the media has handled this whole situation surrounding our team. So already we can see this is not headed in the best direction. Plesac blaming the media for causing this controversy when, again, he is the one that decided to leave the hotel, to not return by the time of the 10 p.m. curfew. And so regardless of what else he says in this video, I think that's something that he probably needed to think a little bit about before he started blaming the media. But he does say the media is portraying me and my best friend and teammate to be malicious with our actions when we were really practicing safe practices. Now, he does admit in the video that he went out to dinner with some of his friends, as we mentioned already, after that start against the White Sox on Saturday. Came back to the team hotel that night, but he came back late. They returned back after the 10 p.m. curfew, which is really what caused the issue here. And he insisted that him and his teammate, Mike Clevinger, were following the CDC rules. He said they were within the Center for Disease Control guidelines when they left the team hotel and were never with more than 8 people the entire night. And so, I think he's trying to justify the fact that he decided to go hang out with some friends and he felt like he followed the protocols that are in place. And so he goes on a little bit of a rant in this video about the changing of the guidelines and the kind of uncertainty around what is acceptable, not acceptable. And so he goes on to say, I just did a little bit of research and I found out that CDC guidance is changing day to day, and 10 people or less is considered a safe gathering, especially if you're 6 feet apart. He said, I went on to say that entire night, dinner and hanging out at my buddy's place after, we were not with more than 8 people the entire night. So the media is portraying me and my best friend to be malicious with our actions when we were really not justifying what we did because we left the hotel and according to the new rules, we weren't supposed to leave, but essentially saying that they felt like they followed all the protocols other than not returning to the hotel or essentially not staying with the team and going out to meet with some other friends. There's a lot more that I could read from this video. There's a lot more that Plesac had to say, but I'm going to try to weigh in on this as objectively as I can. And I didn't really even write a script down for this part because I don't think I really need one here. In my opinion, it's very easy to kind of step up and say these guys were being idiots. I don't think there's any way around it. They were being idiots for thinking that they could get away with doing this. They were idiots for thinking they could leave the hotel and come back after curfew and not think that it would impact anything with the team, impact anyone outside of themselves. I think they were idiots for putting a night of fun ahead of their teammates, ahead of these guys that are going out there every day and battling with them and really trying to accomplish the same thing, which is let's complete this season. Let's have a 60-game season and a playoff and make the best of the situation that we're all in. And, I think these guys are idiots because they felt like they could go outside of that, go outside the rules and get away with it, or that there wouldn't be any blowback, there wouldn't be any negative feedback based on, their decision to go out and have a night of fun. But at the same time, these are not bad dudes. And I don't think that what they did makes them bad dudes. And I've seen some pretty harsh takes from some folks in the media, which, I'm not surprised. But I've also had some time to think about this. And, I probably wouldn't have said all the things that Zach Plesac said in that video. I get why Terry Francona said he was disappointed in his young pitcher for some of the comments that he made in the video and probably for making the video in the first place. I don't think any manager, coach, anyone else wants to see their players putting out these diatribes. It just tends to never come across the way the player intended, even if they're trying to clear their name. Whether you like it or not, that's why they have PR people. That's why they have a communications team. They know how to spin things in a positive way. And, sometimes that's needed for some of these athletes, or at least, maybe spin's the wrong word, but they know how to say things and frame things in a way that doesn't make anything look worse. And I think that in some ways, Plesac made his situation worse with some of the comments that he made. But at the end of the day, we're talking about a young pitcher. We're talking about a 25-year-old, and this is really Plesac's first full year in the major leagues. So this is a guy who was in college not that long ago. This is a guy who has been bouncing around the minor leagues a little bit as he prepared for, the majors. Obviously joined the Indians in 2019 and their major league team. And this is really his first year as a starter. And so you're talking about a 25-year-old adult man, no question about it. I don't think at 25 you are, going to be called a kid or anything like that anymore. These are not college students or student athletes. But at 25 years old, you're talking about a guy who wanted to go out and meet up with some of his friends and wanted to see some folks that he hasn't seen in a while. And so, from what it sounds like, he went to dinner with some of his buddies, being back close to home in Chicago, went back to his friend's place afterwards, hung out with a small group of people who wanted to get together, have a drink, find out what's going on in each other's lives, that kind of thing. This was hardly Lou Williams going to the strip club and claiming he was just there for some takeout chicken wings. I'm sure that those are delicious, but I'm not buying it, Lou. And this was not the Miami Marlins team going out for a night of fun in Atlanta, although I guess we don't know that for sure. So it's always possible there's more to this story that will come out. Maybe they weren't doing exactly what they said they were doing, but assuming that we can take their word for what was going on and they were hanging out with friends in a small group, that's really what was going on, that you had some young guys, young pitcher in Zach Plesac and his best friend on the team in Mike Clevinger going out to meet up with some friends in the midst of a tough situation that we're all trying to navigate. Just because we're talking about some professional athletes doesn't mean that these are not real people, doesn't mean they aren't going to want to see their friends or have any social interactions before the end of the season. I think it's just not realistic to expect that, unless the Major League Baseball wants to put these guys in a bubble and follow the NBA protocols, because that's obviously working well. But in my opinion, that's the only way that you're going to really kind of isolate yourself from these potential situations. You're talking about a lot of young guys who are making millions of dollars or at least hundreds of thousands of dollars. And, they're used to going to these cities on the road, going out to see friends, going out to clubs, going out to bars. And so, I think you have to realize that it's going to take some time for some of these guys to really wrap their mind around what the implications could be from some of these decisions. Do I think that Zach Plesac and Mike Clevinger left the hotel that night thinking, hey, we're going to go do this, and if it ends the season for the Indians or if it puts our season on hold for a month or a few weeks, we don't really care? No. Do I think that they felt like they wanted to go see some friends and everything would be fine and there's no big deal? Probably. And so unless we're going to create a bubble, and maybe they will here in the playoffs, but unless we're going to create a bubble, you're going to have these situations. I look at the situation that happened, with the player who just got cut with the Seahawks, and you have him trying to sneak a girl in who's dressed as a player, and led to some funny quotes from Mike Vrabel and others. But, you're going to have these situations. And I think the big thing here is the leadership on the Cleveland Indians, how they're going to respond here is that you can't have that with two of the guys who are critical to your success. I can say it right now. The Cleveland Indians are not going anywhere in 2020 if they do not have Zach Plesac and Mike Clevinger. They just don't have enough hitting. We've seen with Adam Plutko the last week that, he's a guy who can maybe give you a few innings, but, he's not going to be a fourth or fifth starter on one of the best rotations in baseball. And that's what the Indians are. That's what they have. That's what they need to have, even with the, resurgence of some hitting this week. And it always helps to play the Detroit Tigers. But even with that resurgence and what Franmil Reyes is doing, and now Frankie Lindor is starting to hit a little bit, and some of these other guys, they're still going to be a team that's going to, only go as far as that starting rotation can take them. And so if you don't have Zach Plesac, you don't have Mike Clevinger, they're not going anywhere. And I think that those guys have to realize that. The leaders on this team have to realize that. I think that's where you maybe do miss a guy like Corey Kluber. in the clubhouse, in the pitching staff. I mean, Shane Bieber's a relatively young guy himself. I mean, he's the same age as Plesac. And I think that you're asking a lot of young guys to kind of keep themselves accountable. But, you think about someone like Carlos Carrasco, who's gone through leukemia, who's high risk, who's someone who's done everything he can to get back and to be a key part of this team. And, I think that Zach Plesac and Mike Clevinger are going to have that kind of come to Jesus moment where they realize that, they can't be doing these things. They really did put themselves in front of the team, and maybe they don't feel like they're at risk by going out. Maybe they don't feel like, being someone in their 20s who's a professional athlete and in peak physical condition puts them into a high or even moderate risk category. But we certainly know that Carlos Carrasco is in a high risk category. And so I think they need to have more respect for Cookie Carrasco, for the other players on this team. And when they stayed out late, they missed that curfew. They put themselves into this COVID-19 protocol. They essentially put everyone at risk, and especially Mike Clevinger. To me, Zach Plesac, I don't know if he came forward or how it was brought to the team, but he ends up in a car service headed back to Cleveland. And so the impact or the risk was minimal. He went out, met up with some friends. He ends up getting sent home. Obviously not a great look, not the best situation. And he violated the league's COVID policy. And so, he deserved to get sent home, and he really deserved to be, sent to the alternate site, essentially demoted to the minors. But to me, Mike Clevinger deserves the most scrutiny here. And that's coming from someone who is a big Mike Clevinger fan. I love his stuff. I think that if he can put it all together, he's an elite pitcher. He's got front end of the rotation stuff, velocity, movement. But to me, you're talking about a guy who's 29, who's been in the league now for a number of years, who, in some ways is one of the faces of the Cleveland Indians, certainly one of the most recognizable faces of the Cleveland Indians. And again, all of that means very little if he ends up in that car service. If he ends up in the car with Plesac going back to Cleveland, again, age we can talk about. He's a little older. He should know better, those types of things. But the fact that he ended up on the team plane and didn't feel like he needed to come forward when they had just sent Zach Plesac home in a car service, to me, that is the thing that I think is the most egregious in this whole situation, because Mike Clevinger getting on the team plane put everyone at risk, at least at risk of having a spread, and a spread that could potentially put, the season on hold. Maybe these guys don't have a lot to worry about, as I mentioned, when it comes to COVID-19 because of their age, because of their level of health, although you never know what, some hidden health issues might be. But maybe they feel like they're not in a high-risk category, but getting on the plane, potentially putting himself in a situation, and who knows what he did on the plane, but potentially putting himself in a situation where he could have passed it on to others in a confined environment, if he wasn't wearing a mask and if other people weren't wearing a mask on the plane. And they would have had to shut down the season for a little while. They would have probably had to shut down the White Sox season, and potentially could have, again, had a tremendous ripple effect, for getting on that team plane. So I don't think it was a great look for Plesac to play the victim card on Instagram. I understand why he wanted to clear his name, let people know that he had been following all of the recommended CDC guidelines around distancing and number of people. And, I don't want to kind of harp too much on that, but to me, Clevinger getting on the team plane is the most concerning thing, especially being a guy that's a veteran. And I think that's where Terry Francona, where the rest of this Cleveland Indians organization, they have to get that message across. And so these guys clearly broke the rules. They put the team in jeopardy. And, I think there's definitely some punishment that has to come with that. And so they've been sent to the alternate site, and we'll see how long that lasts. But clearly, I think that was deserved. But at the end of the day, I'm also not going to forget that these guys are humans. They're young guys. They're in their 20s. They're athletes who have a lot of money and status and fame, and people are going to want to see them, be around them. And it can be difficult I mean, we've all been isolated. We've all been in our homes for weeks, if not months. And, I have a friend says, hey, I want to go meet you on a patio. I'm going to pick up my mask and potentially go. Now, I don't have to worry about a team of folks that are counting on me, but, I understand these are human beings, and hopefully this will be a good lesson for them going forward. And if nothing else comes out of this, maybe this will end up being a good thing because other guys will take this more seriously moving forward, and we could potentially avoid any of these situations in the future. I'll kind of end this section with the last quote that I think is worth sharing from that video with Zach Plesac. He said, "It breaks my heart for people to think I'm a bad teammate or a bad person, but I wanted to share with you guys that moving forward, there's a selflessness lesson taught here. And at the end of the day, I want everybody to be healthy. I want to be a good teammate. I want to win baseball games. That's all I want to do. So whatever it takes for me to get back on that diamond and start shoving it up people, trust me, I'll be ready when they need me." Again, this was not a statement that was put out. This was part of his video. So a lot of candor there and, definitely some passion. But I think this team will be better for it if they can use this as an example and a way to teach these guys what not to do in the future, because we got to keep this thing together for another 40 games essentially. And these types of things are always going to put that at risk if guys are going out and they're not following the protocols that are in place. So going to move into our next section here on episode 4 of Just a Bit Outside, our Cleveland Indians podcast. Again, you can follow us on Twitter at Just Outside Pod. You can follow me, our host, Brandon Castel, at bcastohio on Twitter. But want to talk a little bit about my man, Franmil Reyes, because Joe Boo has delivered. And, the last episode, we talked a lot about waking up the bats. We talked about the fact that this team was just not hitting the baseball. And, again, what was that going to look like? They couldn't rely on these starters to come out and pitch shutouts every night. And so we called on Joe Boo to wake up the bats, and he has done just that, at least when it comes to Franmil Reyes and a few of the other guys on this roster. Reyes hit his 4th and 5th home runs of the season on Sunday. Frankie Lindor hit his 4th. Jose Ramirez hit his 5th. So it was a big explosion on Sunday, and they needed it because, remember, that's the Adam Plutko start. He gets chased from the game early, and the Indians were able to score enough runs to overcome that. So, this was really a fantastic performance all around of hitting from these guys. And I think it really starts with Franmil Reyes, and he's really a guy that has started to heat up. It started really right after we put out our last podcast and has continued ever since. And so he really put one into the seats on Sunday. But his first home run, before we get into the second one, that was the big distance one, his first home run was an opposite field shot. And I thought that was just a beautiful piece of hitting, because when you think about a guy with this kind of Hulk strength, you're thinking about a straight pull hitter, a guy who's only going to hit it down the line or down the left field and, put one deep into the seats. And so I think what he's done over the last week to 2 weeks has been incredibly impressive. Starting with that first home run on Sunday, it was an inside-out swing, just sliced the ball deep towards right, put it over the right field wall. And so that was just a fantastic piece of hitting. But I think the more impressive one was on Friday night when Franmil Reyes really got the party started with a 462-foot bomb off Ivan Nova to the deepest part of Comerica Park. And I've been to Comerica Park a number of times, actually. We used to go there quite a bit as kids. Pretty much every summer, my dad would take us up to a game or two at Comerica Park. And one of the first things that jumped out at me going to Comerica Park after going to so many games in Cleveland and going to a few other stadiums and ballparks as well was the size of that ballpark. That Comerica Park is an incredibly vast ballpark, and vast is a great way to describe something like that, because it's just a word that fits perfectly with what Comerica Park is and what it feels like the first time you see it. It's vast, it's expansive. The field feels like it's so much bigger than the majority of other ballparks. The ballpark itself is just so spread out. Beautiful ballpark, but so spread out. And so I actually looked it up because I had a strong feeling that it was the deepest outfield in the majors, and looked it up as I was preparing for this episode. And it turns out I was correct. That at 420 feet, Comerica has the deepest straightaway center field in all of baseball. So you're talking about an absolute moonshot that Franmil Reyes put over the bushes in center field, nearly got out of the ballpark. It was the second longest home run by an Indians player tracked by StatCast since 2015. So this thing was an absolute rocket ship, right along the lines of that Jim Thome home run that we always play in the intro. This thing was just crushed. And so that was Friday. And on Sunday, he almost put another one over the Chevrolet sign in dead center. He smoked this ball out of the ballpark, one of the hardest hit balls I've ever seen. I think I saw that it was the second hardest hit of his career, 114 miles per hour. And he smashed that thing into the wall in dead center off the shrubbery, off the greens, about 453 feet from home plate. And so this thing was just absolutely crushed. And, that's really what this team expected when they picked up Franmil Reyes in the 3-team trade for Trevor Bauer. And we're starting to finally see that guy who was crushing the ball in San Diego, didn't hit the ball as well after coming over to Cleveland last season. But we're starting to see, what this guy is all about. The nickname La Mole actually means beast. So Franmil Reyes is from the Dominican Republic. His nickname means the beast. And we're finally seeing him unleash that beast. Those were two of the biggest moonshots that I have seen in recent history with the Indians. And I think that is what this team needs. When you think about some of these other guys at the top of the lineup, you think about Francisco Lindor and Jose Ramirez being able to produce, and you hope that Carlos Santana at some point is going to produce. But to have a guy who's 6'6", 275 pounds in the middle of your lineup who can hit the ball, essentially out of Comerica Park, 450, 460 feet, that really puts fear into opponents. And you saw that in the ninth. Unfortunately, Franmil Reyes takes the ball off his hand. I don't know if the pitcher was trying to brush him back. Joe Jimenez, I don't know if he was trying to brush him back or actually hit him after he put two balls over the wall. And of course he hit that one on Friday night as well. So they looked like maybe they were looking into it, whether they should eject the pitcher. I didn't think it was egregious. It looked like Reyes kind of ducked out of the way at the last second, caught him on the lower part of the left hand. And that's always a very dangerous area. A lot of small bones in the hand, and certainly something that could lead to some problems with gripping the bat. And last thing you wanted to see with the way this guy's been just smashing the ball over the last week. But turned out he was fine. He was smiling in the dugout using that hand, and then he did get x-rays after the game that came back negative. And so you hope that this guy won't have any lingering effects, because he's hitting the ball with tremendous force, tremendous violence right now, and, starting to scare some folks, I would think, when you think about him hitting behind Jose Ramirez and hitting behind Francisco Lindor. Now you're starting to get pretty dangerous here. All right, and so last thing I wanted to cover this week is a little bit of a look around the rest of Major League Baseball. And so wanted to kind of see where things are at, right now after the Indians won their 13th game on Sunday. The Minnesota Twins also had 13 wins coming into the day. They were leading the American League at 13-8. And so the Indians are right there. They're right on the heels of the Minnesota Twins. They're in this. The Tigers were at 500 coming into the day. They were 9-10, so they fell, or they were 9-9. They fell to 9-10, and the Chicago White Sox right behind them at now 11-11. And then, of course, you have the Kansas City Royals, who are bringing up the rear in the AL Central. So the Indians are right where they want to be. We knew this was going to come down most likely to the Twins and the Indians battling for the American League Central Division. And I thought maybe the White Sox would be a little bit better than they are, but obviously they're young. They're bringing in some veterans who have never played with this team before. And I still think they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. Obviously, they had pretty strong showing with all those home runs on Sunday. But right now it looks like the Indians and Twins are going to be in an expected battle for the American League Central Division Championship. Of course, the Indians did not fare well when they went up to Minnesota, but we'll see, how they continue to battle the Twins the rest of the season. I think it's going to be a great battle to watch. Two very talented teams. The Indians have the edge in the pitching. The Twins have the edge in the hitting, but we'll see. The Indians were extremely cold when they went up and played Minnesota, and their bats were completely frozen, even though it's the middle of summer up in Minneapolis. It felt like it was the middle of winter. And so another surprise that's going on right now is the Oakland Athletics actually have the best record in the American League, where they did coming into Sunday. They were 15-6 on the season, so right just ahead of the New York Yankees, who are 14-6, and arguably the best team in the American League. I think the Oakland Athletics obviously have done a fantastic job, but if I had to play one of those two teams in the playoffs, I would take Oakland all day, every day. We know what the New York Yankees are capable of. They scored 115 runs this season in 21 games, which is the most in the American League, compared to just 75 from the Indians coming into Sunday's game. So comparing at the 21 game mark, 115 for the Yankees, 75 for the Indians. The Yankees and Twins were leading the American League with a plus 33 run differential, and the Indians were fourth behind those two teams and the Athletics with a plus 18 run differential, which is actually somewhat surprisingly the same as the Chicago Cubs had coming into the day, and they had the best record in baseball at 13-5. So pretty interesting. Again, such a short season. Normally we wouldn't be talking about run differentials and playoffs and wild cards and all that kind of stuff, but now that we're 22 games into the season, we are going to have to start thinking about those things at some point. In the National League, the Los Angeles Dodgers, again, as expected with their payroll and their off-season acquisitions, they look like the best team in the National League. They lead all of baseball with a plus 55 run differential. So think about that. The Yankees are plus 33. The Twins are plus 33 to lead the American League. Dodgers are plus 55, which is pretty insane after 22 games. They've scored 120 runs, and they've allowed just 65. So it turns out having Mookie Betts on your team is a pretty good thing. Betts is leading the majors in WAR, although Shane Bieber is third in that category, so he's certainly your leader right now for American League Cy Young, and potentially in the mix for American League MVP this far into the season. We'll talk more about Shane Bieber, I'm certain, on the next episode, but Shane Bieber's right there in the mix. But right now, Mookie Betts is leading the majors in WAR, which is wins against replacement. So essentially giving you the idea that right now he's the most valuable player in Major League Baseball this season. He has 8 home runs, 18 RBIs, and he's hitting .309 despite changing leagues, despite changing teams, and despite changing coasts. So this guy is the real deal. Obviously, it took a lot of cash to keep Mookie Betts and to sign him to a long-term deal with the Los Angeles Dodgers. And so we'll see what happens in similar situation here in Cleveland with Francisco Lindor. The Red Sox obviously made the decision to trade Mookie Betts to pick up some prospects and to focus on the rest of their team. They wanted to get under the luxury cap threshold, and so they made that move in the offseason, and it has not paid off for the Boston Red Sox, at least in the short term. They are 6-15 right now, last place in the American League. And they have the second worst record in all of baseball. Only the Pittsburgh Pirates are worse. The Red Sox have a negative 40 run differential, and they had allowed a league-high 133 runs coming into Sunday. So obviously getting rid of Mookie Betts when you trade your best player, who is one of the best young players in baseball, and who's a guy who is essentially going to be the face of your franchise for the next decade, and you deal him to the opposite coast. When you're the Red Sox, you're the Boston freaking Red Sox. You're supposed to be one of the most iconic franchises in all of baseball. You think of yourselves, and rightly so, especially now that Terry Francona helped you win a few World Series titles, you think of yourselves as equals, in many cases better than the New York Yankees, right? The Boston Red Sox should be right there. It's the Yankees, it's the Red Sox. And then you say, okay, then it's the Cubs, then it's the Dodgers, then it's some of these other teams that people might think about. But you would think that the Boston Red Sox, of all the teams in baseball, playing in a major metropolitan area, major market in Boston, having the history, the Green Monster, Big Papi, Pedro Martinez, all of this. You'd think they learned their lesson when they sold Babe Ruth to the New York Yankees back in the day, but apparently they have not. And again, we'll see how this plays out long term, and I'm not saying that Mookie Betts is Babe Ruth, but right now he's the best player in Major League Baseball, at least this season statistically. I'll still say Mike Trout is the best player in baseball. But again, the Red Sox without Mookie Betts have been 6-15, but their bigger problem than not having Mookie Betts is that they just can't get anyone out. Their pitching has been atrocious. Again, 133 runs, most in the major leagues that they've allowed this season. And so if they're going to fix anything, they've got a lot to fix. But if they're going to fix anything in this short season, it's got to be finding a way to get people out. And so, I think that's going to be their focus. And that brought up an interesting question this week. I forget exactly where I saw it, but I saw someone posting it on social media, so feel free to reach out if that was you, and I'll be happy to mention that on the next episode. But someone brought up the idea this week of whether the Indians would consider making a trade with the Boston Red Sox. Obviously, Terry Francona has a lot of relationships in Boston still, and would the Indians consider making an offer to the Boston Red Sox? They've still got a very talented roster. They've still got some very talented hitters. And the one name that I keep hearing, because the Indians, what they really need right now is an outfield bat, right? I mean, they could certainly use an everyday catcher, but they're going to get Roberto Perez back here at some point, and I think he gives you enough at the catcher position. There aren't these Mike Piazza type catchers out there that you can go after. I mean, you just want a guy who's going to hit you some home runs, call a great game, throw some guys out. And although Roberto Perez had a pretty rough start to the season, I think between him and Sandy Leon, you got a home run from Sandy Leon on Sunday. I think you probably are going to stick with what you've got at catcher. And so what the Indians really need right now is a corner outfield bat. They need a guy they can plug and play in the outfield, really anywhere. I mean, Delino DeShields Jr. has done a great job since coming back from having COVID-19. He's been fantastic in center, plays great defense. He's the best bunter this team has had in years. And he's done a great job being that number 9 hitter. He's been essentially everything the Indians wanted Oscar Mercado to be this season. A guy who could kind of reset the table for the team at the bottom of the lineup and, be able to get those guys, Cesar Hernandez and the rest of those guys at the top of the lineup, an extended opportunity to drive in runs. Delino DeShields has been great at doing that. So I feel like they are okay at center field right now. Obviously, they've still got Mercado. I don't think you're giving up on him anytime soon, but it's been quite a while since he's been in the starting lineup. You've still got Bradley Zimmer. He's dropped off and not really hitting the ball and probably better suited for a corner outfield spot right now. But you really don't have anything at the corner outfield spots. Domingo Santana, potentially can give you something in right field, but I think they could obviously use an upgrade. He's a short-term fix, and maybe he gives them more this season than what he's shown so far, but maybe not. And so the name that got thrown out there that I've heard a couple times now is JD Martinez, former Detroit Tiger, current Boston Red Sox outfielder, one of the best power hitters in baseball when he's at his best. Even at this point in his career, the guy is a fantastic hitter, one of those guys you'd love to have in the middle of your lineup. And so there's been some questions about would the Indians potentially trade one of their young pitchers? Would you trade a Zach Plesac in light of what's happened here? Would you deal him to get JD Martinez? Would you trade an Aaron Savale? Is there somebody else that the Red Sox would be interested in potentially? I don't see Plutko being, the guy that's going to get this deal done. But with JD Martinez in particular, let's take a closer look at whether the Indians would consider this, whether it would make sense. Martinez essentially has 3 years and $62.5 million left on a 5-year deal he signed with Boston back in spring training in 2018. However, it's a very player-friendly deal. So JD Martinez can opt out of that contract after this season and after next season. So it's essentially only the rest of this year that he's guaranteed to be on your roster. He could opt out, become a free agent after the 2020 season, or wait until after the 2021 season, although he is scheduled to make $19.35 million in each of those seasons. So in 2021 and 2022, should he decide to opt in, you'd be on the hook for paying him almost $19.5 million in each of those seasons. So on the surface, this deal would make a lot of sense. You know, if the Indians need a big bat to play corner outfield, they haven't had one in a long time. Michael Brantley was a great hitter, but they haven't had a big bat, power bat, corner outfielder in quite a while. And it's been a tremendous weakness for this team. They've had to find power in so many other areas, so many other spots. And I think if you add JD Martinez to this lineup, you fix a lot of concerns. You know, you're bumping guys around, and now all of a sudden you've got, an all-star guy who's one of the better power hitters in baseball right in the middle of your lineup. In the 2 seasons he's been in Boston, JD Martinez has been just that, one of the best hitters in all of baseball. He's at .317. He's had 79 home runs, 235 RBIs in 296 games. So you're talking about a guy that's basically averaging about 40 home runs and 115, 117 RBIs a season over his 2 years in Boston. Now, he hasn't gotten off to a hot start or great start this year, but nobody has with that Boston Red Sox team. So the numbers are there. The production is there. He would immediately give the Indians one of the most feared lineups in all of baseball, and I think a lineup that could potentially compete with the Yankees, I dare say, if Franmil Reyes can keep this going. I would not have thought I'd be saying this after our last episode, but if Franmil Reyes is going to give you that kind of power and you plug JD Martinez into the middle of this lineup instead of having Bradley Zimmer or instead of having Domingo Santana, and now you've got that feared middle of the lineup, you've got Delino DeShields potentially giving you what you need at the bottom. You've got you've got some guys that are going to come around in Carlos Santana, and you would assume Frankie Lindor will hit for a higher average than he has now. And so you've got a lineup that could be one of the best in baseball. However, I just don't see this trade happening. Again, it's not one that's been really proposed, but it's fun to think about. Certainly makes sense on some levels, but I just can't see it happening for a couple of obvious reasons. So one, the Red Sox are going to want one of your best young pitchers back. If they're having a problem with pitching, the Indians have a lot of it, and especially starting pitching, and so they're going to want somebody back that they can build around. So probably a Zach Plesac, at least an Aaron Savale. Again, if you could get this done for an Adam Plutko or something like that, then maybe you start to think about it. But I just don't see the Indians wanting to give up Plesac or Savale, given the control they have over those guys and just how important pitching is, especially when you are thinking about the contracts that they would have to pay compared to what they would be paying for JD Martinez. And again, the second reason I can't see this deal happening is you're essentially renting him for 1 year. There's no guarantees that JD Martinez is going to stick around. He could opt out after this season. So there's just no chance that the Indians would give up Plesac, Savale, or anything meaningful, really, I think, with the potential that JD Martinez could opt out and you're essentially getting a 40-game rental in exchange for one of your best young pitchers. Now, maybe that's enough to say, hey, we're not going to give you one of those guys, but we'll give you a lower-level guy. And if the Red Sox are desperate to make a move to lower their salary, then it might be worth it. Maybe then you could decide to make a deal, but I just can't see that, especially considering he's 32 years old. And a bigger concern for me is the fact that he's really not an outfielder at this point in his career. He played 39 games in the outfield last season compared to 107 at DH. Now, part of that is the Red Sox have some other options. If I'm the Indians, I might call about Andrew Benintendi. Obviously they had Mookie Betts last season, and so there might be more to why he's playing DH, but clearly he's not a plus-level defender. And so you've already got a guy in Franmil Reyes who really can't play the field every day. And I just don't see the fit with him and JD Martinez, who both are probably best as designated hitters. And then the last kind of point here would be, even if all of that made sense, even if the Indians could get JD Martinez for a lower level guy, even if, they felt like he could play the outfield every day, you could plug him in right field and he could be your everyday right fielder. I still don't think it makes sense because you got to remember that at the end of the day, the Indians still have the same owners. And I don't think the Dolans are going to want to spend $39 million over the next 2 seasons. So even if JD Martinez does opt into that contract in 2021 and 22, I'm not sure that the ownership would look at that as being a good thing. And so ultimately, I think the Indians will look to make a lower level move at some point to get a bat, maybe something similar to when they added Jay Bruce a few years ago. They did just get Tyler Naquin back, so he's just making his way back from a foot injury. So I think we'll probably wait and see, what happens with Tyler Naquin. Is he going to be able to give them anything? Will they ever get anything out of Zimmer or Mercado? Domingo Santana, what is he going to end up being this season? So, again, I think it'll be a little while, but I think that's got to be an area they're looking at. I don't think JD Martinez or anyone like that quite to that level will be the answer. But at some point, they're probably going to look at upgrading a corner outfield spot. They pretty much have to, unless you start to get more than you expect out of Naquin or Domingo Santana. Then it puts a little bit less pressure on you to make a move. So we'll take a look at some potential realistic trade options for them on our next episode. We'll take another look back at some Tribe history in the future. But again, thanks for joining us on this episode. And again, you can give us a follow on Twitter. You can follow me at BcastOhio. Follow the podcast at Just Outside Pod. And we look forward to talking with you again next week.